Assalamu alaikum, ladies. Alhamdulillah, I finally did it. I actually wrote a book. It's dedicated to all the single Muslim mothers out there, hence the name, How to Be a Single Muslim Mum. Inshallah, it's available as an ebook, paperback, and it will be available as an audio. Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu feekum, sisters, for the support. Check out the link in the description to get yours. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode. We're talking today with, mashallah, Al Mubarak, sister that is very dear to me. I don't get to speak to her often, but I really enjoyed our last conversation, which was for the By the Pen podcast. And we talked about some of her books. She is she's got many books. How many tens of books now? Maybe 30 or plus more books you've written, I think.
It's over 40. I don't know now. I don't
over
know
40. Allah Mubarak. So I'm going to be talking with Zakiyyah about the topic of single Muslim motherhood. So alhamdulillah. Zakiyyah, could you give a short introduction for yourself for those of the listeners who don't know who you are? And also, if you could tell us how you got to be a single Muslim mother, inshallah.
Well, I am well known for my writing, and I write books that are self-help novels. When I first started writing novels, I've written short stories, and now, as you mentioned, I have over 40 books. And I also am a soul care mentor and a mental health practitioner. And I think most people either know me through my books or through my emotional wellness advocacy work for the female soul. I also teach Quran and Tadabbur. Being a single mother was something like, I guess it's the same for all women. You never really know that it was going to happen to you. I didn't even imagine it. I didn't have any examples of it, to be honest, in terms of, because my mom and my mother and my father, at the time he passed away, were married over 50 years. I think it was 54 years. And so that was my mom's only marriage. Like, she married my father. I'm sorry, she was 18. He had been married before. But that was her only marriage. And the only, I think, real life example who was close to me that I saw of a single mother was my eldest sister, who's not Muslim, because my father and my mother, they accepted Islam after they got married. So she was born before he became Muslim. But my eldest sister, who's not Muslim, was a single mother. But I didn't think of her like that. It was just my sister. And then I didn't think of it like that. It was only after I went through my own things that I started kind of thinking of that. And I think that in my family, my mom had 15 children. So in my family, Allahumma barik.
Allahumma barik. Wow. Role model.
Out of the 15, and now that I think of it, I'm thinking out loud here, I'm the only single mother. I think one of my sisters got divorced and was a single mother for a few years, but she got remarried. So I am the only single mother, and my other sisters are not divorced at all. Like, their marriages were like 20, 30, whatever years. So it's, even in my family, it's kind of like, I mean, they're not obvious about it, but I can tell they're not quite sure how to deal with me, because it's not really our culture, so to speak. I think I come from I think for people who are not in the United States, they can best understand the culture that my parents come from. Is kind of like the Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern religion, Southern Baptist, like those people divorced. Like, what do they say? Touch the pearls. So even as Christians, it's like, what, like, come from that type of legacy where they were the upstanding Christian families and, all of that. So even when they became Muslim, that kind of carried over. So me having, being a single mother, I remarried, and then I sought divorce again. And so it's like, what in the world's going on with this girl? Like, she's just like, can't get her stuff together. So that's like how people look at it,
Okay, so what would you say were some of your initial challenges? You've touched on a few things there, which may have been I'm assuming it would have been a bit challenging for you, but what would you say have been some of your initial challenges that when you first became a single mother?
I think that I didn't even process myself as a single mother when I first became a single mother. I had been married over 17 years and I had never even, I wasn't even in a space to like, oh, I'm a single mother now. I was more so just trying to hold on to my iman, trying to figure out my life and where I belonged in the world, trying to figure out how to take care of my daughter. And it was only after I had done some of my own healing work and preserving my deen and alhamdulillah, getting a hold on my emotional health, at least in a way that I was able to navigate the things that I didn't know about at that time, like triggers and things that still happen today.
Yeah.
That I uh, that I can, did when I was able to do in a healthy way. That was when I began to be introduced to the culture of being a single mother. And to be very honest, like it's something that and only in the last couple of years have I been able to move through that because I got my first divorce back it's 2013. And so it's only the last couple of years that I have been able to find my own internal peace with being a single mother and not really worried so much about the image of it amongst Muslims. Like alhamdulillah, like I still get triggered, but I'm at a stage now where it's more like, that's very interesting how someone could misunderstand something that ultimately ends up being something very beautiful. But in the beginning, was there once I realized how the Muslims looked at it, it was very difficult because to go through a period of, first of all, I never wanted to be divorced, but to go through that process of making istikhara, and honestly, I was kind of rebelling against getting a divorce internally. I was like, no, I was trying to find a way that
you're trying to find an excuse to stay, isn't it? You're trying your best to work through the situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I was grasping onto straws that weren't even there. So yeah, so I tried my best. I mean, to the point where by the time I did leave, I could barely walk. I literally, for me, I couldn't even stand up half the time. And like I was so, I like I was telling one of my friends at that time, I said I felt like I literally gave my blood to this marriage. Like literally, like it was like I'm donating blood. like I'm giving my heart, I'm giving my soul, I'm giving my mind, I'm giving my body. What else can I give? Drain the veins.
Yes, literally. SubhanAllah.
And so I was so emotionally spent that I think it was 4 years, I think it lasted, that I couldn't even stand for salah. Sitting for pretty much every salah. Like I might be able to do half of a salah standing and then my legs would collapse. And when I started full time, I would wake up and hold on to the walls to walk and then just stabilize myself. Like I could walk to my desk, but then like I would feel like I was going to pass out. It was all kinds of things going on. So by the time I came to enough to realize how the community was seeing me, it was a huge shock because I was thinking like, do these people fear Allah? Like I was in shock, like what kind of world this was, that do they not believe in the day of judgment? Like you're talking about people who have had zillions of private conversations with Allah, endless tears with Allah, and then had to make a choice that even if it ends up working out for you, nobody in the West or the East looks at it as something good. So why in the world would I be wanting this? Like, it's like the way the people talk about divorce and the way it's actually experienced are two completely different things. I was like, where are these people who are playing with divorce? Where are these people who are playing with marriage? Where are these people who just run to get a divorce for no reason? I'm not saying they don't.
Where are the people who are fantasizing about it? Like, subhanAllah, like, that's one of the ones that I've heard recently. Somebody said, oh, their sisters were fantasizing about being single. I was just like, where? Literally, where? I mean, even when I was, still single, I used to get sisters who were married talk to me, and I think they felt to some extent that they could open up to me about
problems they would have with their husbands, which I hated actually, because I don't want to be the bad influence. Like, you know, a sister's having issues with her husband, and then she later on, when she had an argument with him, goes and tells him, oh, well, you know, I was speaking to Samad and she said this. So it's just like, don't involve me in your marital business, because I'm not here the bad influence. But it's fun that, like, some of the sisters, I would always encourage them, you know, to try to do their best for their marriage. Because obviously, if you hear a sister talking about her situation with her husband, you're only hearing from her side. You don't know the whole of the situation. So only two people is going to know about that, and that's the husband and the wife, you know. But I never felt that those sisters were trying to get out of their marriages. I could, even when they was complaining about their marriages and things that they weren't happy with, I knew that they still wanted to be married. They didn't want to be single. Do you know what I mean? They wasn't looking at me thinking, oh yeah, I want to be single like you. Even if they would say something like that as a joke, like try to say like, oh, you're lucky because you're by yourself. They didn't really believe that, because they knew that there was things that the husband was doing for them enough that they, you know, to keep them in the marriage. So subhanallah, like I don't know where this fantasizing about getting divorced comes from. Even for sisters who, you know, you might meet a sister who definitely, like, you think to yourself, subhanallah, like, I don't know how she's even in that marriage. But even then, that sister, she doesn't want to be divorced, because like, it's not an easy thing to go through, and it's not an easy thing to, you know that you failed. I think, like, for me in my situation, that's how I was feeling. Like, if I get divorced, I've just failed. That's what was in my mind. And I'm not somebody who likes failing at things. So it was just like you said, you're clasping for straws that are not there, and you're doing your best to try to find any reason to, like, stick with this thing, because inshallah maybe it's going to work out for the better. But after, if you consult Allah with everything, and you do your prayers, like you were saying, like istikhara, I was doing that a lot. You realize Allah will show you, like, you know, khalas, like, this is just not, you know. So, and that's one of the things that I've learned, is like, don't fight with Allah. If he's trying to show you something, don't try to keep pushing the other direction, because you're only going to end up burning yourself in the long run.
I agree. And I think that where the misunderstanding comes from with the fantasizing about divorce, I think that what people misunderstand is that there are women fantasizing about safety. Like that, meaning they're fantasizing in their mind. They're trying to imagine, what would life look like if I was emotionally safe with my husband? What would life look like if I was just safe, period? And then what happens is that when a person is in an emotionally unsafe marriage, which a lot of women are, unfortunately, and just to be clear, that an emotionally unsafe marriage is not unfixable. Therapy can help and all
Exactly.
that. So emotionally unsafe is different from abusive. But I just wanted to say that, so when a woman is in an emotionally unsafe marriage, she does tend to fantasize about, how does life look if I were emotionally safe? How would life look if a man who actually cared about what I feel would take care of me? Then some of them, in that space of fantasizing about a life of safety, a life of emotional safety that they can't even conceptualize, some of them may wonder, like, wow, maybe this is why some women get a divorce. But it's not the divorce itself that they're fantasizing. It is they're trying to mentally grasp their options while they're feeling suffocated and unsafe in the situation they're in.
Exactly, definitely. SubhanAllah. So in the Muslim community, like, we had a little kind of short discussion before we started recording this. That's why I had to jump on and start recording, so you didn't lose all of the stuff. But what would you say some of the stigmas are in the Muslim community surrounding, like, divorce and single parenting in general?
I would say, before I can answer the stigma, I would say, before I can address the stigma, I think we have to understand the culture in which the stigma is happening. The culture in which the stigma is happening is that we are living, as I mentioned when we were speaking before, with the merging of cultures. And the Western culture of extreme purity for the female, and the Western culture based on the current Christian understanding of divorce, which is, it is a major, like, it's not even just a major sin, it's just not allowed.
It's just not allowed.
It's not allowed. And I think the only exception is like adultery or something like that for some sects of Christianity, but some don't even allow it for that. So so we are in an environment that we like stuff like till death do us part. You actually will have Muslims who have nikah, like a nikah ceremony or walima, and they actually make these vows. Like they will say where this is not from
really. Wow,
Oh
wow.
yeah,
They actually do that? Oh
oh
wow.
yes. Muslims definitely do that. And we also live in a culture that fantasizes, specifically for the female. The little girl grows up believing that she's going to meet her Prince Charming and she's going to live happily ever after. And this is not only in fairy tales. People will say, oh, it's the fairy tales. No, the fairy tales are just actually a manifestation of the culture in which they were created. And so little girl, even if she didn't read those fairy tales, she will be told things like, for example, you better learn how to cook because no man will want you if you don't cook. You better get that attitude straight because if you no husband's gonna want you. You better learn how to dress right because no man's gonna, if you can't be sexy for your husband or some people are told that. Now some are told the opposite, that they're just shamed for any sex. But either way, whether shamed for sex or whether she's told that she needs to learn how to please a man constantly, otherwise he's going to run after other women, the message is always the same. Your entire worth and happiness depends on meeting the needs and the desires of a man. Your entire life depends on that. And what it's called in psychology, it's not only called in psychology, but in many circles, but psychology also, it's got good girl conditioning. So the reason that it's hidden very, very well amongst Muslims is that there is inevitably some overlap where there are some shared concepts that if you are married, yes, you should be doing things to please your husband, right? But where the difference is that it's not my whole life. It's not my whole identity. It's not my whole worth. So what ends up happening is that the red pill community, the incel community, all of these sorts of things that are happening, that are some the flip side of the good girl culture. It's like the dark underbelly, so to speak, that was never public before, but has now been made public. It's always been there. And that ideology has fed the good girl culture. But what used to be the case, and it's similar to, like, for example, in the United States, people who did sihr used to hide. Now today they're in the open. So now the same thing is happening with the misogyny, the incel, the red pill. They used to hide and just kind of try to do like a puppeteer, like they're manipulating how women think, and it creates this good girl culture. They would hide in the church, they would hide in the masjid, they would hide in the relationship communities, but now it's more out in the open. So what we're seeing, it's not just the stigma that came about on its own. It's a stigma that came about as a result of us living generation after generation in what is good girl conditioning, which is really just a pretty side of male supremacy and male domination, as opposed to taqwa-centered manhood.
Definitely, subhanallah. Yeah, because like that's one of the things that I've been trying to get across in my book, that as Muslim women, we are servants of Allah first and foremost, as are the men. So how can it be that you're raising your daughters to kind of condition them to have their whole life kind of focused around this? Their life should be focused around being servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and building their personalities and their confidence off of that. And then if you have that connection with Allah, then later on your connection and your relation with other people will be better and stronger, because you will understand how the limits within each kind of relationship that you're going to have in your life as well, because any relationship can become toxic when it's not it's not done properly. Like you can have excessive cases of people loving each other like excessively, infatuation, all these kind of things. Anything can go to extremes. And even the Prophet ﷺ tells us that we shouldn't love somebody, was it 100%, or we shouldn't hate somebody 100%, because Allah turns the hearts. And the person that you love today, maybe tomorrow you will hate them. The person that you hate today, tomorrow you will love them. So you don't know, like this is how human nature is. You go through different challenges, different things happen to you, and you don't know who's going to be there for you tomorrow, or who's going to be that person that's going to you know, be that helping hand to help you or whatever. You know, the person that's with you today, that it could be the best friends that you never thought you're ever going to be without them. Tomorrow, that person, you know, maybe you find out something about them and all of a sudden it's just like your relationship is just khalas, finished. SubhanAllah. So
Yeah,
these
true.
kind of things happen.
And I think that what
Yeah,
we're seeing today, there's a good side to it too, you know, because the Prophet ﷺ about how the affair of the believer is always good. And one of the things I marvel about, with even despite the stigma and everything, what I marvel about is how Allah balances out things. So when something is going wrong, Allah will show symptoms. He will give us symptoms. Like if something wrong in our body, we will feel symptoms, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical. He will let us know that there's a sickness going on. Like, and one of the things that I was writing in the notes of a book that I'm working on is how, like, the Prophet ﷺ talked about how there's a piece of the body that if a piece of flesh in the body, that if it is good, the whole body is good, and if it's corrupt, the whole body is corrupt, and that's the heart. So the heart of the ummah right now is sick, and so the Prophet ﷺ has made it clear that we are like a body. And so what is happening is that as the parts of the good girl conditioning are making more and more women sick in the body, they're leaving it alone. So there's an actual good side of this. So what's happening is that because many of us, myself included, have suffered so much from the good girl conditioning that I will take full responsibility. I processed it as Islamic femininity initially. And because it was making me so sick spiritually, emotionally, mentally, I had to go back and study my deen. So it ended up being a good thing for me. So today, if I'm being 100% honest, because I know I'll be talking about certain challenges, the most joy I have felt from my soul has been as a single mother away from marriage. And it is so joyful. It is so fulfilling that I know I could never remarry a man, get married again, unless a man comes with he has to be emotionally healed. He has to be respectful of me. And if he's not, I told one brother before, well, I told a couple of brothers even this, I told him I would be more willing to be the Elizabeth Taylor of the Muslim community than to deal with disrespect. And what I mean by that is that,
of course, subhanAllah.
Yeah, Elizabeth Taylor, just for those people who don't know, she was married, I think 8 or 9 times, I forget. And for me, I don't carry with me that stigma anymore. I used to. I look at the right to divorce, as I should look at the right to divorce, as one of the many rahmas that Allah gave as part of his revelation, as a form of honoring women and to restoring to women their human rights. And I believe that without the right to divorce, I don't think I would be Muslim today, because I would have just suffered so much and just assumed that this is my deen. I probably would have just left Islam. And I did almost leave Islam when I was understanding Islam through the good girl conditioning. And so now today, what I think is amazing, I think it's a really good thing personally, that women who have grown up in the good girl conditioning are filing for divorce. They're choosing their emotional health. They're not filing for divorce and having like brawl burning parties. They're filing for divorce, and they're going into therapy. They're going into and I'm sorry if that reference doesn't translate for the international audience, but if you don't understand it, they can have this saying in the United States where brawl burning means like someone's becoming an extreme feminist, and I don't like that. I don't like that type of thing of mocking feminists, because there are many, just like we see with the civil rights movement, that was in the context of mostly Christian beliefs, and which also translates into some of the LGBTQ. We do know at the core that they were just trying to restore human rights. Started off with people of color, expanded to other things. And the same thing exists in a lot of the history of feminism, is they simply were trying to restore the rights to women. And I think as Muslims, we have an intellectual and spiritual responsibility as people who are the holders of divine truth to speak the truth about what's really happening. While there are aspects of feminism that while there are aspects of some strands of feminism that do not align with this, the core of what most feminists are trying to do is just commanding the good and forbidding the evil and protecting the vulnerable from harm. So the fact that feminism by itself has such a bad name speaks volumes about the mindset of the Muslims today, that out of all of the things like civil rights, democracy, all of these different things, philosophy, the one thing that gets the worst name is feminism. And why? And what's the difference between all of these? It's mainly because it's advocating for women. And that speaks volumes about how deep and pervasive misogyny is, because we are not willing, even as Muslims, and this is true for men and women, we are not, I've never heard in the mainstream discussions, even from Muslim women, even Muslim women, I respect, that feminism is dealt with in an honest, fair lens. I've never heard it. It is almost like obligation. In order for me to get cool points with other Muslims, I have to lie about them. I have to treat them basically like the media treats Muslims. Like, it's almost like we took how the media treats Muslims. We're going to take the worst example. We're going to take the terrorists. We're going to take the wife beaters and abusers, and we're going to say, this is Islam. And that's the same thing that Muslims are doing with feminism. And we're not willing or to have a conversation to say that, yes, there are some strands of feminist thinking that don't align with Islam, but the core of what many of these women are trying to do is actually something that we should be supporting. And so, and I'm not saying we should be feminist. We should identify people. I don't care what people identify as long as they're not contradicting Islam. But I'm saying all that to say that these women who are leaving these relationships, they're not joining any kind of feminist cult as people are trying to accuse them of. They're joining therapy. They're going into self-healing. They're learning about, all of these different things. While some do join feminism, the woman I have met from the Muslim community who actually identify as feminists do not, I would say 99.9% of them, they do not align with any of the ideals that go against Islam. And it's very rare that I meet a woman who does. And it's what ends up happening is that due to the stigma of the single mother, the divorced woman, and also the woman who loves herself, because my first introduction to the world of being derogatorily called a feminist was when I began to talk about, just like I had written this book about, it's called Let's Talk About Sex and Muslim Love. And I was talking about the dangers of women being taught extreme purity culture. And I interviewed a woman who had what's called vaginismus. And which basically is a medical condition where, due to the stress, and sometimes it can be a medical issue, but for her, it was actually trauma, the stress from her ultra pure and the Desi community. Vaginal muscles were closed and there could be no penetration. So what I was posting about is how the right of the woman to basically experience sex as something pleasurable with her husband. Exactly. Some brothers came on my page and were tagging other brothers and saying, look at this feminist or whatever. I also began to be slandered when I started talking about self-love. So this introduced me to kind of like the incel red pill part of the Muslim community, where any sign that a woman loves herself outside the context of centering a man is looked at as anti-Islam. It triggers me sometimes, but actually now I'm more so at a stage, I find it really deep. And actually it's a sign of the wounded masculine amongst many Muslim men who actually, like, the wounded masculine is a man who rejects the qawama that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him.
Yes.
He's definitely a man who rejects taqwa, and he wants to now come in as a victim and demand that women abandon their sexual needs, abandon their standards for marriage, abandon their whatever they want for a mahar, abandon their goals in life, abandon their businesses to shrink to the level of his fragile, non-existent concept of who he is as a man. And when I say non-existent, meaning he doesn't have really any manhood. So he has this really fragile ego. So what I tell my students, some of my clients, is that what we see is what's happening at the time of is a sign of the day of judgment, is that so many things are turning around. Like, for example, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he taught the Sahaba, the men, to be very careful with the fragile vessels, which is the woman. But now, in this time, the fragile vessel is the ego of the man. So the woman is assumed to be the one who's stronger. The woman is assumed to be the one who has the responsibility to cater to the fragile vessel, which is the male ego, and to tiptoe around how she talks, to tiptoe around how she shows up, to tiptoe. And I'm not talking about just natural kindness and compassion and even femininity inside of a relationship. I am talking about the literal eggshells that women are healing from. And because what is at the root of this good girl culture are men who don't want to be men. They are men who want women without the responsibilities of being men. So they have tantrums in lectures, they'll do it in khutbahs, and they are mad. I mean, no matter what a woman wants for mahr, it's never low enough. You know, and so it's like, instead of thinking, instead of the man thinking, wow, like I can talk to Allah and ask him to give me the rizq. No, he wants to talk to the woman, and he expects the woman to provide for him something that he doesn't trust even Allah will give him. And one of the things I told my daughter,
it's like, you know, sorry to interject there, but it's like this kind of man. He's just like he's a what do they call it? A mama's boy. That's what they sound like, because it's just like, you want a woman that's basically going to do for you what your mother was doing for you.
I know they call them mama's boys, but I think that's being too kind. That's because I think there's a stage of a man's life, a boy's
obviously
life.
It's a step worse than that, but yeah.
It's tremendously worse. It's, to me, the image I have of these men are like that bully on the playground who's like 10 years old, like maybe 7 years old. He goes over and kicks down everyone's sandcastle. He knocks down everyone's block, and then he goes and cries and pouts in the corner and says no one's playing with him. That's what they're doing. Like, why would anyone want to play with you? so and then to get their needs met, he goes and hit, like, and these are the boys we're told they hit you over the head, because he likes you. This is the foolishness we're taught. So while many of them may have originally started off as mama's boys, I think that it's a good thing for a boy to go through a period, and a girl to be a mama's girl, where you felt so emotionally safe that that's your life, right? In that stage of 5 years old or whatever, that your mommy is everything. But I do, there is some truth in this, in the sense of the mama's boy reference, in that these men are looking for mothers. But I would say this, they're not only looking for mothers, they're looking for the mixture of a mother and a daughter and a wife. They're not looking for
I was gonna say that, because they need that subordination element in there. And obviously, and that's the thing. I think, like, I've heard one thing I've said, I don't know if I've said it online or not before, but I've heard a couple of sisters say before, and it really made me sick to my stomach. But they said that they don't want their sons to get married, and they want their sons to stay with them forever, right? And subhanAllah, when I heard that, I just thought, like, why would you want that? Like, for your, like, as a woman, if you're happy in your marriage, you know, and these, you know, if you're married and you're happy in your marriage and you love your husband, why wouldn't you want your son to be how your husband is, in the sense of him being a husband to somebody, and giving, you know, being a good husband to another woman, and having grandchildren, inshallah, these kind of things. Like, why would you say you don't want your son to go anywhere? You want him to stay with you for the rest of his life?
Well, she's
because there's a lot of women out there that kind of have this kind of mentality in their mind. It's like their son is like, that's the man in their life that they can control. You know, they've got, and at the same time, even though they must have been loved so much by their mothers, it's like, it's to an extreme level where the mothers haven't actually allowed them to become men. They've not had that experience where maybe they've had actual men in their lives to show them how to be a man, and what it means to be a man, and to being that responsible person, and enjoying having, you know, or bearing that kind of you know, role of leadership in a responsible way, knowing that responsibility is not something to oppress others, but it's a burden in and of itself, and, you know, something you have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to be able to fulfill that, because obviously Allah's going to question them on the day of judgment. But I think there's some element of resentment with some of these young men, that when they grow up, they instead of turning that resentment towards their mothers who have raised them in such a way, they put it on the woman that they end up being in a relationship with.
Yeah, this is true. But like, from a mental health perspective, it is the resentment toward the mother. It's just projected to the wife. So what you're dealing with, it wasn't love in the first place. I think we need to just be really clear. Like, that's enmeshment. It doesn't mean she didn't love her son. It just didn't manifest as love. It manifested as enmeshment.
Yes.
So just like you have,
can you repeat that word again for me? Enmeshment. I haven't heard that word before. Okay, so yeah, you can explain that, inshallah.
Yeah, so basically, like, enmeshment is like, basically there's no real boundary between the two people. Like, you're meshed into each other. It's not love. It's almost like, if you want to look at it from a biological standpoint, it's almost like the mother and son have become so like conjoined to the point where all of the life arteries and the heart and all that is shared. To break them apart, they both would die. So that's what emotionally is happening, and some mental health professionals will call it emotional incest. Like, she is engaging in emotional incest with her son. So these are women who just like you have and to be 100% fair, you have the wounded masculine, which we talked about. And then on the flip side of the wounded masculine is the wounded feminine. They are both very similar. However, one manifests the darkness of what's going on inside of them, manifests as in a masculine, like, I'm harming the world way. And the other one, wounded feminine, manifests in a way whereas I'm so helpless and I need so much and I love this person so much that it's their obligation to be here for me, and I don't have an obligation to be here for myself. So the wounded feminine is a state where a woman excuses herself from being responsible for herself through victimization. And so just like the man becomes a victim, like everybody has to do something for him, the woman becomes a victim that everyone has to do something for her. Whereas the man is going to, let's say, and I'm talking about symbolically, I'm not meaning literally, the man is going to kind of like the one knocking down the sandcastles and the blocks. The girl is the one who she has the psychology that she not looks at what's going on, and let's say if any attention is going to someone else, she starts having a tantrum and saying how maybe she's sick or like nobody's paying attention to her. And so she manipulates the situation through what people would call feminine energy, but it's really just manipulation through playing victim. And she's learned that being helpless and pretending that you don't have any agency over your life is how you get your needs met. So for her, she will guilt her son into being with her and all this. But to be fair, I want to be clear, for mental health, from a mental health perspective, neither the wounded feminine nor the wounded masculine start off insincere. It doesn't start off in the first stage of it. It's actually just a trauma response. In the first stage. However, over time, Allah gives every human being, and there are very rare exceptions to this in the spiritual realm and in the emotional health and mental health realm, He gives every human signs that this isn't okay. Like, if you're worshiping like other than Allah and you grew up and you weren't Muslim, Allah is going to give you signs that you're doing wrong. Even if the first stage of you worshiping other than Allah was innocent, over time, it's no longer innocent. You made a choice. But once Allah gives you the sign, you have made the choice to stay in spiritual darkness. So therefore, you are accountable at that time. Similar with emotional darkness is that in the beginning, it's a trauma response through transgenerational trauma, something that happened when you were younger. No man, no woman, because we all are born upon the fitra. We're born upon the pure nature that Allah has given us spiritually, emotionally, mentally. But it is our environments that corrupt that. So when we are in certain environments, we learn to survive. Like for me, I learned to survive through people pleasing, self-abandonment, seeing what other people need, because I grew up in tough love, where if you showed any sign of having an opinion outside of what your parents want, I mean, you can be smacked and knocked around and spanked, you know what I mean? So you learn that to survive, you abandon yourself, right? So I had to, when Allah showed me that this isn't healthy and this is wrong, because not only is it harming you, it's also preventing the person you're with, whether it's in a friendship, whether it's in a marriage, to actually see you as who you are, because you're just kind of shape shifting, to the environment, which some people will actually label manipulation, but it is a survival tactic in the beginning. But once you get the knowledge and you understand this is unhealthy and it's unfair to yourself, to your nafs, and it's unfair to the relationships around you. It is your obligation. It is your responsibility in front of Allah to do the healing work. And it's not going to be a perfect journey. We're not talking about perfectly healed people.
Yes.
We're talking about healthily aware people who can, like, for example, the reminder will benefit them, like the reminder will benefit the believer. So what's ended up happening is that these women have learned. And it's and when I give these examples, it's not for us as an outsider looking in to say, oh, she knows better. We don't know who's gotten, just like, for example, you can't look at somebody who's not Muslim and say they know the truth and they're rejecting it. As a general rule, it's very rare that you know something. One. The same exists in emotional health realm. You can get signs that you're like, your gut's like, I don't trust it, but you don't know. So similar with emotional health. So what these women have learned is that there's an actual fringe benefit to being helpless, which means I don't have to be accountable for anything. So many of them will seek to get out of having to pray because, oh, my therapist said that, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so it doesn't trivialize the struggle, because I understand the struggle. It's just the fact of you don't get to check out of life and check out of your responsibilities. So what the women do is that they want the masculine safety. They want the safe masculine, which is in the nature of all women. We want the safe masculine. Yes. However, they don't want the harm of the protective masculine, meaning the harm that, like, for example, I've experienced this in my life where a person who was supposed to be a protector becomes a source of harm. So she's kind of, the wires are getting crossed. And so what she's seeking is, like, she wants that safe masculine, but she doesn't want the power over her that would come through an actual proper poet. And so she seeks to, this is why they call it emotional incest. She seeks through her son what she can't get through a man who's a proper husband. And so and then the boy, because he is subservient to her, because it's the son, she can kind of manipulate him. And a lot of times, a lot of these women actually create a whole entire life out of it, where he brings home a woman she doesn't like. Oh, my heart is breaking. I'm at my nerves, and I'm gonna pass out, and I'm not gonna live, and you would have killed your mom, and all kinds of things like this, you know. And then the boy's like, oh my God, I don't want to kill my mom, you know, I don't want to stress her out, I don't be cold. And it's from the bed, it's her, she's sweating, and you're such a good son, thank you, son, you know. So it's so she's playing around with this. And women do it also with, these women do it also with spirituality, you know. And some women, and I will be clear, some, and I just did a podcast where I talked about the women who are not doing it this way. Like, there are women who, they have been harmed so much as a Muslim, like, and they get triggered with the hijab, and so they take it off, and they are still trying to figure out how their way back to Allah, and they're sincerely trying. And I've had some of these people, so I know that's real. There are also women, however, let's be honest, there are also women who see through that story and out for having to dress as a Muslim, and out for having to show up as a woman, a believing woman, out for having to be a proper wife even to her husband, because now I can play the victim card. I know some people don't like that's a triggering term, but I believe that's exactly what it is. And so I can, like, oh, but this happened to me when I was younger. And just like we would not accept a man who beats up on his wife to say when he was younger, his father beat up on her, on him, we should not accept a woman using learned helplessness as a strategy to get out of any of her responsibilities. So what you're finding is that you have the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine, either pretending to be a victim or victimizing others to get what they want. All the same, the middle goal is to be excused from responsibility to show up properly in life. Allah talks about both of them in the Quran. I find this very interesting. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in one part of the Quran, he's talking about a conversation of the people who are going into hellfire. May Allah protect us. And so what's happening is the weaker group is saying, oh Allah, like, give them double punishment, because they're the ones who decided us, right? They're the ones who caused this. And Allah says, double for all but this you don't understand, right? Or, you know, so basically, and I'm just giving the general translation of the meaning. And what I've taught in some of my classes is that pay attention to what Allah is doing here. He is calling out the fake victim. They had all of the signs, they had all of the ability to choose to worship Allah, even if they had to live in a situation like Asiyah alayhi salam, which I talk about in my book.
Yes, exactly.
If the only power that you had was to worship Allah in the privacy of your home and know that you could be abused, then you have that obligation. Okay. And even if you have to hide it, nobody can control what you do in the privacy of your heart between you and Allah. And so what ended up happening with a lot of these people who will be playing victim is that they were so convinced, and this is what I find so profound about this part of the Quran. They were so used to playing victim in this world that they thought they can trick Allah. Like they can, they were so into this space that they thought Allah would fall because they know Allah is as you know, he's al-Latif, you know, all of these things. And so
all the mercy. It's like when people just go and sin and stuff like that, or they do something that they know is definitely wrong, and you'll tell them, oh, you know, you shouldn't be doing this or whatever. They say, oh, but don't worry, Allah is merciful. You know, they say like it's just like, oh, well, Allah will forgive you. He's the most merciful. You know, it's okay. You know, take it easy. Don't be extreme. Like Allah's merciful. They come out with these kind of things as if to say that because of Allah's mercy, you don't have to make any effort. Or you don't have to try.
Exactly. And so what we have to do is, because the ghurur, and this is something I teach in Tadabbur, and to be very clear for those who are listening, this is not an easy thing to avoid. Logically, it sounds so simple, but the ghurur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, and you'll find it at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah as a trait of the munafiqun. However, nifaq is of levels. It's not only the extreme hypocrite that has the traits of nifaq, and this is something the Prophet ﷺ talked about. Other people can have traits of hypocrisy, and one of the things that one of the traits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran over and over again, and I talk about this in my Tadabbur classes, is the concept of ghurur. Ghurur is a space of spiritual self-deception where you trick yourself into believing that you are actually meaning good, but you're actually meaning harm. And so what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, and then you'll find in the second page of the most masahif, is he explains to you what is going on. Like, for example, he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And so what this means is that, and when it is said to them, do not cause corruption on the earth, and they will say, but we are reformers. Or are we the ones who set things right? Muslihun is like, if something is broken, you bring it back together and make it right. And Allah says, unquestionably, Allah, certainly, it is they who are the corruptors. But then he said something, and I explain this to my students, and I want you, all the listeners, to pay attention to this. He says, وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ, but they don't perceive it. And the word yash'uru in Arabic is like to feel something. Like, for example, if I say ash'uru bi alam fi batni, that means I feel a pain inside of my stomach. So what he's saying that these people are in such a state of ghurur. They are they're not just doing corruption. They are the main corruptors on earth, but they do not have within their nafs and their mind and their bodies any perception or feeling or nerves of sensitivity, whether mentally, that they are doing anything wrong. And so what I asked my students, I said, Allah is just. So how is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would punish this person? Because he's talking about, like, these are people who, like, the context says it, we know these are people in the hellfire. So what is it? It's the ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us throughout the Quran that he's going to show us his ayat, and we're going to recognize them. And so
yes, exactly.
and so what the challenge of this is that the vast majority of the time, just like those of us, I grew up, alhamdulillah, my parents became Muslim the year I was born, but those of us who were tested with growing up in a household that wasn't Muslim, those of us who were tested with being abused or in an unsafe, toxic environment, those of us who have survived sexual violence and all these different things, we live in a certain survival mode in the beginning, or we live according to what we understand is right according to what we learn, and Allah will let us live like that way for a while, and then after we've gotten used to it, it's become familiar, and even for some of us comfortable, then He gives us His sign. This is the test, because by the time He gives us the sign, we have already consciously or unconsciously gained benefit from dalala and darkness.
Yes.
And so now the test is, whether it's a spiritual test, whether it's an emotional test, whether it's a relationship test, and it all boils down to a spiritual test. But I mean, like Iman versus Kufr versus, just doing what's right.
Yes.
The test is, are you willing to put in the work to rewire your mind, your nervous system, your heart, your life, to make familiar what is healthy for you, or are you going to just allow yourself to get comfortable what is already familiar, which is unhealthy? And this takes dedication. It's not easy. Even if, for example, if you come from an unhealthy relationship, and let's say you were the one who was abused, what you will find is that if God blesses you in a healthy relationship, and the mental health professionals will say this, you will be triggered so much that you will react to the healthy partner as if they were the one harming you. And this is not easy. So you have to take responsibility in what most humans do not want to do. Hence the reason that most of the humans enter the hellfire is they don't want to do the work. Some people are willing to do the emotional work, but they will only accept it in the context of kufr. Some people will only be willing to do the bare minimum to stay Muslim, but they're not going to do any of the work that requires them to actually be a full, proper Muslim who's from the muttaqun, a person of taqwa. And this is what's happening with men and women. And to be very fair, it is not easy to get out of this. I'm working through my own triggers and things till today. And I try to be as honest about it as possible. Like I talked about in my book, Embrace Your Spiritual Feminine. I try to model for clients and other people that this isn't some easy thing. It's not like, it's like, for example, when you become Muslim, oh, wow, Tawheed is right, therefore you're never going to sin again. I'm never going to disobey God. It doesn't work like that,
Exactly.
So the challenge is like connecting what the mind knows to training the body, the nafs, the mind, the nervous system, the heart to want the khair and to become familiar with the khair until it is who you are. And oh my God, will your nafs fight you? Forget shaitan. Your nafs will do a whole job on you by
literally, subhanallah, like that's what I was saying to like before, like you have to train yourself not to fight with Allah, because Allah's, like you said, Allah's going to give you the signs, and when He gives you the signs, it's not shaitan you're fighting, it's yourself that you're fighting, because that's where you have to really just take control over yourself, like not let yourself just do whatever it wants. You have to. That's where the submission comes in, isn't it?
Absolutely, because I know one of the triggers that I deal with, and I talk about this to my students, I had abandoned myself so much. And because of how I grew up with tough love, and I learned what it meant to be a good woman and what it meant to be a righteous woman, which really was just false femininity. It was like, it was just like self-abandoning, putting yourself last, pretending you don't have any needs, disconnecting from your desires, and pouring everything into serving your parents, serving your husband, serving your children. And that's how I understood what a righteous woman was supposed to be. Once I learned that that's not correct, I still struggle with triggers that where it's very difficult for me to kind of detangle that ideology from Islam. And so sometimes when I get a trigger, I think Islam made me do this as a woman, because for years I processed that's what Islam asked of me. But Islam did not ask that of me. Trauma asked that of me. Unhealthy environments asked that of me. Unhealthy relationships asked that of me, and labeled it Islam, even sometimes not on purpose. To be fair to the people who were involved, many people, they themselves were taught this was Islam. So it's not necessarily a boogeyman at the end trying to trick you. But most cases, even with men emotionally manipulating women, they were told this is what it means to be a man. They weren't told what
Exactly.
it like. They thought controlling your wife is leading your wife. They too have to unlearn these things. So when I unlearned these things, I till today, and I'm being 100% honest with you, I have to remind myself in the middle of a trigger, Allah did not ask you to do that.
Exactly.
Good girl culture asked you to do that. The trauma asked you to do that. And you convinced yourself, your mind, your nervous system, your heart, even the peripheral of your soul, that this was Islam. And now that you're suffering from it, you think you're suffering from Islam, but you're not. You're suffering from trauma that got mixed with the messages of Islam. They're two completely different things.
And that's the thing. I think you've really kind of hit the nail on the head, and you've mentioned from both sides. So there's definitely some people I've come across that they've gone through these traumas, and they know that it's not from Islam that these things happen to them. That maybe it was raised very culturally, so they knew very little about Islam, like at all. So they thought that, oh, this is what Islam teaches, and with the obviously propaganda that we have in like a lot of different cultures, especially the West. And when it comes to talking about the Islam and how it's oppressive to women and things like that, people who come from these backgrounds where maybe they've been, for example, even forced into marriages, they think that that's what Islam allows. That's it's Islamically that's okay, because they saw their parents as being the Islamic role models or Muslim role models, and they had very little or no knowledge of what Islam actually was. And in some cultures, women aren't even. Exactly. In some cultures, some cultures, Muslim women aren't even taught to pray. Some of them, they don't even get to go to the masjid at all. So, and if they're not praying at home, it's like the salah is something that maybe just the men do. The women don't even get taught in some cultures. So if you're coming from a cultural extreme like that, then when you go through these kind of traumas, as you say, then and then the woman, for example, if she's in a Western country, or she's in a situation where she's able to break free of those kind of situations where she's been wrongfully oppressed, the first thing she does is want to run away from the religion completely, take off the hijab, stop praying if she was praying, all these kind of things. But obviously, as you said, there's some people, they know that it's not from Islam, so they use that as the excuse to just abandon the things and not to try. But there's some people that genuinely they don't know.
And that's true. And I would say, and it's not easy to, like, even for me today, because I don't have any direct experience with 100% emotional safety from a Qawam. I don't have that experience. So for me, I have to live in a space of believing in the light. And what I tell my clients is that, and I even mentioned it in my own therapy, like I have my own I have two therapists, by the way. I mentioned how it is so challenging to live in theory, because I have seen, even, and I don't necessarily mean that the lack of experience means someone was intentionally trying. Like, for example, growing up in tough love, I don't think anyone got together in the African American community or the Black American community who came from Christianity into Islam and thought, oh, let's control the women and use Islam. They were already taught certain concepts on how to use you smack a kid around and spank them to get them to do what they're supposed to. That's what good parents do. Where I was growing up, all the good parents spank their kids, So so it's like what's happening is that here's where the disconnect happens, and where a lot of Muslim women who are trying to heal, and Muslim men, are not being treated fairly, even in the Muslim discussions, is that we're just being told it's not Islam, but there's no practical solution being given. So it looks like it's just a game to many Muslims. It looks like, oh, if you don't accept that it's not Islam, then it's your problem and Shaitan's messing with you. But you can't take a person who was taught all of these things, especially from childhood, and it's basically enmeshed into their system that this is Islam. And then you go and just do this wide paintbrush thing of, oh, it's not Islam, so that was just your trauma. But which part was Islam, which part wasn't? I don't know, because the man, and even for me, I have to sit and breathe and, and meditate it before I can kind of, like, my brain can separate it, because it's like there are parts of Islam that if you are not in the space of a man who is, even if he's a good man, but he has yet gotten to what I would call the level of the spiritual masculine in a space of proper taqwa, even if he's a sincere qawam as the bare minimum, if you're in that space with a man who is not yet emotionally mature, is not yet spiritually mature, is not yet developed emotionally, he will harm you, even if he doesn't intend to, because he doesn't yet know the difference between controlling and leading. So what ends up happening, and this is true, in the space of the setup of the Islamic marriage, where the man is the leader, a woman will be compelled to submit to and surrender to a situation that she knows is not healthy for her, just because he is a man. And people will say, okay, she should be patient, Allah will reward her. However, she's between either I disobey him to try to protect my own emotional health and then risk going to hellfire, or I obey him and risk abandoning myself. So in the Islamic setup, which is what confuses a lot of women, and I do deal with this with some of my clients, and even non-Muslims who come from the Jewish and Christian background who are in my audience, or some of my clients, they have a similar struggle. But we have, of course, more detailed instructions on how to work through it in the Quran and the Sunnah. But that does trigger a woman who's come from trauma, because now you don't want to go back into that same type of setup. Because now, what if this good man, he's not trying to harm me, but Islam has given me a system that basically obligates me to give up my agency in certain situations. And that is where a lot of the dilemma is. Now, we can get into a philosophical discussion, technically speaking, no. And depending on your understanding of Islam, we can say that's true. A woman can refuse in a certain situation to protect herself. But that's a really sticky situation, because how do you know, like, because if you're sincere and you're trying to do what's right, how do I know today on Monday I was right to say no and Tuesday I was wrong? I mean, it's really confusing, especially when what's being asked of you is not technically haram. Women specifically who are trying to find spiritual and emotional safety in the context of a Muslim marriage, because the Muslim marriage does put the man as the leader and the woman as obligating to submit to him, and that's a beautiful thing when it's a beautiful thing. However, there are men, and we saw this even with some of the Sahaba, okay, who are a bit more controlling than other men, okay, and that is not emotionally safe for her. So she is not in the Islamic context as we traditionally understand it, unless she has something in her contract that's written before she got married to him that protects her from certain type of situations like that. She really is at the mercy of that man. And this is where a lot of the conversation around Muslim men and women being equal, you know, and there's different responsibilities is not 100% helpful, because it's not 100% true. We might be equal in terms of our spiritual responsibility in front of Allah. Like if he does a good deed, he gets ajr times 10, and I did get the ajr times 10 too, right? And we both have to go on the day of judgment. But in the practical lived experience, that is not how it's experienced for a man versus a woman. So who I am to Allah is not my concern. It's who I am to this man in my marriage that I'm gonna be held accountable in front of Allah is my concern.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah, we've covered a lot of things there, and I'm sure that by now there's, if there's any red pillars listening, there you've been labeled a feminist like 100 times.
I'm honored. I'm humbled and grateful. I don't mind being labeled.
Well, that's it.
If I'm
this is the thing. It's like you want to be honest, and you want to be balanced as well, and you're trying to have that balance, and you know, as you said, just speaking the truth. But subhanAllah, it's like anything that is said that doesn't seem favorable to one particular side, you'll label automatically as other. So some women who are super feminists may come and say, oh yeah, that you're a misogynist. Like, you know, like this happens to women as well. You get labeled as a misogynist.
They would never accept me. I mean,
but that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing. But I think if you get labeled from both sides as you know the opposite, that means that you are in the middle. So
Alhamdulillah.
you're obviously
I
doing
love
something
it.
right, isn't it? SubhanAllah.
That's so true,
Yeah,
because my whole
SubhanAllah.
point of mentioning that was the challenge for the woman was not to say she should reject it. I'm saying that's a jihad enough for the woman. And
Of course.
my point was she does have the obligation to surrender to her husband. My point was
Mm-hmm.
trying to be empathetic to the struggle of the woman coming from trauma, to be able to detangle the trauma from the circumstance and then try to find agency in a space where she's supposed to submit. I am trying to be empathetic and honor that trial. And because
Exactly.
if I were what some people would accuse me of, right, to be this extreme feminist,
Mm-hmm.
then I would just tell a girl, don't listen to him, he ain't nobody.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I was going to say it's so true what you're saying, because, like, it's like you said, it is a test and it is a trial, and I think, the way it's looked at is just like, oh, if a woman doesn't just do it, it's like, oh, that it's like automatically that means that you're not good enough or you're bad or something. They don't seem to realize the struggle that goes into changing having to change it. And I think I always say this, that a woman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's created women that we are very adaptable creatures. But just because we're adaptable and we can change doesn't mean that all those changes are easy. It's just like when we're having a baby, for example, like you'll get pregnant. How many different stages are there during that pregnancy that a woman has to go through? And that at the end, inshallah, you're going to get something good out of it. You want to have that child, but you're going through so many different physical changes, so many different emotional changes. Maybe there's certain foods you can't eat them anymore, or you get cravings and maybe you can't fulfill those cravings. There's so many different changes that you're going through. And, at each stage, you're being tested, in those different situations. Some of them might be good for you. Some of them you might enjoy, and some of them might not be so good. Do you know what I mean? Some of them you might not enjoy at all. But, it doesn't mean that, oh, yeah, this is something easy because, oh, a woman it's like, yeah, this is just what a woman is made to do. So that means that, yeah, khalas, just shut up and deal with it.
yeah,
Everything is going to be
exactly.
like something which it's a struggle. There's challenges there. She's going to feel tired. She's going to feel different things at different times. Maybe she feel like giving up sometimes, but it doesn't, and so just because we're made to be adaptable and changeable, it doesn't mean that we're always going to be happy and enjoying those changes, that are going on in our lives,
Because
so
it might be a controversial concept to some people, but women are human just like men. I mean,
exactly.
because just like a man, his job is not easy. He has struggles to deal with, and all men would recognize that. And that's one of the reasons why they really want their woman to not give them any trouble when they come home. And I, on an emotional level, I completely understand that. However, the challenge is that both of us are struggling in this dunya. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ reminded the men of so that they would be kind. This is something even when the Umar ibn Khattab was the Khalifa, he reminded some of the men of, because we as humans can forget, because just as a woman can be in her head, so much in her head that her husband can come through the door and she can forget for a moment that he just kind of needs to decompress for a second. And maybe you can just give him a hug, ask how his day is. You need to realize that's a full human being who had a whole day going on before he walked in that door. Don't barrage him with all of these questions and where are you, or are you going to do this, and don't forget to fix the light, and all these types of things. The man is same for the man. Like that woman, especially when she has children and she's responsible for the entire household and all of her just mental health for herself, that's a lot. Because like they say, for the woman who's the homemaker, she's never off duty. For the man,
exactly,
he comes
24/7.
Yeah, he can just relax. And the righteous women, many of us are going to strive to make that time as comfortable as possible. But we will have some moments where we're going to forget who you are and who we are. And even Allah is for a second, and we're going to have to be reminded all of it because it's stressful. But what helps, and I will say this so that I can leave it on a good note, is that what helps me, and one of the things I remind my clients, male and female, because I have most of my clients are women, but I do have some male, is that we're all humans in the middle of a struggle, in the middle of a human struggle. Like nobody gets off easy. Men don't get off easy. Women don't get off easy, and that's why, like I just did a class on Tadabbur class on Surah Al-Balad, where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is talking about the al-aqaba. That steep path. And this is the path of every believer, male and female. So what helps me kind of calm down when I'm in a trigger is to remember that this is the dunya. Like, it's not supposed to be perfect. Even if your husband is 100% emotionally available, and even at the level that I would need a husband to be, he's going to have moments of just being a child of Adam, you know? And the same is true for me. But what's important is, can we come together and be healthy reminders to each other, so that we can create a safe space for ourselves, first of all, inside of our own bodies and nafs, and then also for each other, and then be companions of each other on this path of aqaba.
Absolutely. So, mashallah, I've just realized we've been talking a lot about the kind of male-female relationship dynamics, but we're supposed to be talking more focused on being a single Muslim mother now. So inshallah, we'll come back to our main point next, because obviously you do therapy for people, and you counsel people and things like that. I'm assuming that you do actually interact with other single mothers in their journeys as well, somewhat. So what kind of support systems would you say are important for single Muslim mothers?
I think that having a sisterhood, a safe sisterhood of people who are centering Allah and the self-love over obsessing over relationships is very, very important. And I, as I mentioned in the chat, like, I do sometimes address the navigating whether you should remain single, re-enter a relationship, which is why the topics that I brought up do come up, even in amongst single mothers. But the support that we need most is understanding how to be what I call in your spiritual feminine, and which is what I talk about in my book. And all of those principles,
the spiritual quotient.
Yeah, these are the things that these are things that are just between you, your soul, and Allah. Like, and so if you are able to connect to healthy spiritual femininity with you, your soul, and Allah, you can actually pass down to your children, whether it's a daughter or a son or both, what it means to be a healthy, whole human being. And so the support that you need is that you need to be in a space that centers that over any other relationship. Like, this is what single mothers need, is that they need to reconnect to themselves in a way that is the most important relationship that they will ever have in this world. Like, the relationship you have with your soul, this is something Allah has taught in the Quran. It is the most important relationship. Every single relationship can be sacrificed except that one. And in fact, if a person is willing to sacrifice their soul for any relationship, whether it's between them and their children, whether it's them and their husband, them and their money, Allah speaks sternly against these people. So the most important thing, and this is in the Quran, so the most important thing is when we're talking about being a single mother, is to recreate a safe space with her and herself and her soul and her own existence, in a space of compassionate support with other sisters that make a relationship just a personal choice. It's not about, it has to be there.
Dependency. Exactly.
Because what makes single motherhood just an avenue of just transgenerational trauma is when we are fixated on something outside of ourselves and we pass that on to our children. And that's where incest comes in. That's where parents who want to control their daughters and sons come in. Parents are overly involved in getting involved in telling their children who they can and can't marry, what they have to do. If we are not present with ourselves as women, we're going to lose out emotionally and spiritually with our health. And so the biggest thing is to find spaces in therapy or self-help or self-healing or sisterhood where the point is not what's your relationship status with another person, but what's your relationship status with your soul. And that's the most important.
Definitely.
And when I was able to begin that journey, I became safer for my daughter. And next week, my daughter and I are actually doing a masterclass talking about almost having a rift in our relationship, because I was in a space of so distracted by trying to get married and be married that I was disconnecting from her. And I also was in a space of trying to control her instead of trying to connect with her, because I had not yet connected to myself. I was trying to control myself. Like, I was living Islam from the point of view of Allah says, do it, you do it. We don't need any questions. You don't need anything. And it's okay. I mean, we have from the Quran, Sami'na wa ata'na, we hear and we obey. But this is not like, that's the response, right? That's not the whole story. we don't just sit around cutting off our brains from any sort of connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the beauty of our faith. And so what ends up happening is many of us who are striving as single mothers, because we're trying to take care of our family, we're trying to take care of ourselves, we get into a control space. And I did that with my daughter, and it distanced myself from her. And then we were able to reconnect when I let go of that control and just was honest about my healing journey, left alone this whole running after relationships with men, and just decided to nurture the relationship with myself. And then it healed the relationship with my daughter.
Alhamdulillah. So what would you say some of the causes of emotional pain for single Muslim mothers in relation to the things that you've said so far?
I would say the isolation, the social isolation, especially in your faith community and in your families. It's one of the most painful things, because we are created in community. Like, we're created as people who are supposed to connect to others. This is how Allah created us. We are connected to be connected to others in relationships, even if it's just friendship, family. And we're also supposed to be in healthy community. And this was something that the Sahaba needed themselves.
Absolutely.
So the biggest, I think, emotional pain is that one of the trials of navigating single motherhood close to the Day of Judgment is you're not going to have that community. You're not going to have that family support for most of us. You're just going to have to create like these kind of small little spaces yourself. And many times it's not even going to be in your physical community. It can be online. And so this is a part of, I think that we have to give ourselves credit for just staying in the fight, so to speak, for our souls, because we are at the time where many people are experiencing holding on to your deen is like holding on to hot coal. So the emotional pain, we do have to recognize, is not just about being a single mother. It's about being a single mother in these times, because there is not really a tangible safe space for us. The non-Muslims don't think well of single mothers. So even if you're in the West and you might have the right to go get a job and be single, but nobody's giving you stickers for it, and the Muslim community has just followed after that and made it even, in my opinion, in some ways more emotionally damaging than the non-Muslims, because they've put God in the mix. And they've taken the deen of Islam and used it as a weapon. We also have women who don't feel comfortable around single mothers because they're a threat, because maybe they think their husband might want to marry them, or they're scared of the mirror they see, that you're a possible outcome in their life. And then there's also the ostracizing of the happy, joyful, healed, self-love single mothers. Because whenever I when I started showing up with self-love online, there was a lot of opposition. So it's like, there's no way you can do it right. Like, if you're happy, you're spreading everybody to fantasize about divorce. And if you're miserable, you prove to them that you shouldn't be in that situation in the first place. You should have stayed married.
Exactly.
So this is part of the emotional pain, and that our deen is used as a weapon against us. And we're told that we were the ones who listened to Shaitan to break up our marriages. We were the ones who decided to follow feminism, and we thought we can do without a man. So all sorts of things we're accused of things. We don't even have to say a thing about our life, and we already have like a zillion stories showered upon our head about what's happening with us.
I remember one time in the mosque, I was in a mosque once, and we just finished like a sister's class and everything, and I met this auntie say, one of the sisters, it was her mother basically, and I didn't know this sister very well, or her mum. It was the first time I was meeting her mum, but still, she went through the usual drill of questions. I don't know if it's the same in America, but in the UK, when you meet older women, they go through this drill of questions. It's like, oh, who are you, what's your name, who's your husband, or are you married, how many children, all these kind of questions. And
Yeah.
when I told her I was divorced, she said to me, oh, when a woman is divorced, it's her fault. She just said it like that. And just like, okay. I was just like, she didn't ask me why did I get divorced, how long I've been divorced, nothing. She just said, oh, when a woman gets divorced, it's her fault. So it's just like, okay. I was just like, right, thanks.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks for that.
That's unfortunately, some people won't say it out loud, but it is the assumption. Like, people tend to, like, and this is a part of the good girl conditioning that we were talking about earlier. And I had a similar situation happen to me, and from multiple angles, but one that comes to my mind in the forefront is, there's a sister who's a friend of mine, and we both have a mutual friend, and she was talking to the friend, like, and the other friend was like, oh, how is Zakiyyah and her husband? And she was like, oh, they're divorced now. And the sister was like, what did Zakiyyah do? I mean, because he was a good man. That was her immediate reaction. And so the thing that it's a very challenging thing, and I don't want to even lighten it at all. But I would say that out of Allah's mercy, I was able to work through those type of scenarios, and like, it was very triggering. It was so hurtful at the time that it happened. But I now am at a space and that I never thought I would get to, which is when I hear that, I make dua that Allah guides that person and heals that person and forgives them. I can't imagine how miserable a woman has to be inside of her own mind and soul to think like that. Like, and I'm not even talking about there's no way, because Allah did not create the human soul like that. There is no way that a healthy human soul who has a healthy relationship with themselves and with their soul would ever come out of their mouth with that kind of stuff, except that they would immediately self-correct. So the fact that she thinks like that means she hates herself. So I don't get as offended as much. It can trigger me, but so many women are living in internalized misogyny. And this goes back to the mama's boy thing. Like on TikTok, they have this trend, toxic boy moms going on, and where the thing is that it's acceptable, and some of the women are and by the way, when we're talking about toxic boy moms, my daughter showed me some of the trends. It is not like these women are not ashamed of it. They're happy. Like, kind of, like, I'm petty. It's like a lot of them are, it's like they enjoy it. And so like, it's like, oh yeah, I'm a toxic boy mom, because I tell, like, if my son hits my daughters, I tell them they'll apologize to him. I mean, you shouldn't, and they're like, I know it's wrong. And it's like they laugh about it and it's funny. So what we have is that, like, a culture of this is another emotional pain that happens, is that the single mothers, and sometimes the married women, but even among some single mothers who have sons, and especially the ones who have only sons, they have zero empathy for the woman's journey and everything about the boy. And so there you find this kind of cycle going on of it's beyond enmeshment. It's like literally indoctrinating those boys into actually creating single moms in the future, basically.
Yeah, definitely. SubhanAllah. Yeah, because I've seen that situation where sometimes even single mothers, and they've got a girl, a boy, and they have this enmeshment with the boy, and the daughter is just like, she's just there for the purposes of serving the brother, the purposes of like cleaning up after him, all that kind of thing. She everything that's wrong is her fault, even if it's the boy that did it. This kind of mentality, and then as a result, the daughter, she feels alienated, she feels unloved. She doesn't feel that, that she doesn't have any kind of positive influence of males in her life as well. You know, she feels this kind of sense of abandonment. So because obviously if she's been raised by a single mother and that it's not having a relationship with the father, then it's just like, you know, there's nobody there for her that can like make her feel like she's important or to make her feel like she's worthwhile, like she, you know what I mean, like she's worthy. You know, she's just made to feel like, you know, she's just there, you know, to be
And
like of
that's
service.
what marriage is for many women, which leads many people end up to get divorced, is that even if the man himself is not wronging her, that training from young puts her in a space that propels her into single motherhood, because that's the only way that she can regain her sense of self. She has to be alone for a while to kind of reconnect to her existence as a human. Just being like a living being, whole body. Because, and I would say that one of the things I'm so grateful for in being a single mother is that Allah has blessed me to work through so much of that. And trust and believe, I'm still on my journey. I'm deep in my journey, but Allah has brought me so far that it feels amazing that I'm not in that space anymore. Like, I legit don't care if I ever get married again. I know that I have a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't need, and I don't mean this from the standpoint of extreme feminism. I mean it from the standpoint of what Allah taught in the Quran about the human soul whom He loves. Is that I don't need a human intermediary to make me honored. If my Lord loves me, He said, the Prophet ﷺ talked about this in the hadith, that in specified that if Allah loves someone, He's announcing that in the heavens. This is for men and women. He didn't say, oh, the married women, the single men, or He didn't.
Exactly.
It's the human soul. So to learn that I matter to Allah, like whether I'm married or not, that my name could be announced in the heavens, whether I'm married or not. And to come to a space and understand that the Tawheed of Islam teaches me that every human soul has a direct connection to their creator. And the only relationship status that matters is your relationship status with your creator. What is that connection? How is that defined? And everything else is only just going to follow behind that. And the fact that I've reached a point, it gives me so much joy that I literally feel joy in my heart when I wake up, realizing that. Because for years, I was deconstructing my brain from and detoxing my system from good girl conditioning. Some of it's still there that I have to work out, that it comes up with a trigger. But overall, the space that I live in each day is like my favorite time of the day is the last third of the night. I love memorizing the Quran. I mean, I feel so special. You know, I can't even explain it. And it wasn't like that in the beginning. It wasn't like that in the beginning. When I first was the beginning of my single mother journey, I almost felt ashamed to sit and stand in front of Allah. Like I felt like I'm less in front of Allah because I'm not married. So it affected me that deeply. Like Allah's blaming me for not being married, even though Allah was the one who guided me to not be married through istikhara. It doesn't even make sense. But this good girl conditioning.
You felt that guilt still, yes, of course.
Yeah, because I was so indoctrinated into your husband is your Jannah and your Nar that nobody really emphasized you are your own Jannah and Nar. Any relationship that you have is just building on the relationship that you have with your own soul. So yeah, I can earn blessings through being a good mother. I can earn blessings through being a good wife. I can earn blessings by being a good daughter to my parents. But the real thing is, what is my relationship with myself in front of Allah, even when no one's around? That is that's the real deal. And so learning to love myself, I wish I could explain it. And now I get when people talk about how when they were able to, after they healed, they found a partner who was also healed, and they have so much joy together because they don't have those unhealthy conditionings going on. I've never experienced it yet, but I can feel how that can be beautiful. Like just in my system, I say, wow, I can see how that can be beautiful, because just being in that space by myself feels amazing. How much more amazing would it feel to have like a compassionate soul companion as a man who's also in that space, and we're like living our life together? I think it's amazing.
Yes, subhanAllah. Definitely, because I think it's just one of those things where, like, I just wanted to touch on what you're saying about, your relationship with yourself, your own soul. Is like, I think that's, if you establish that relationship, the way that Allah intended. I think for me that the thought that came to my mind was that is like that's the basis of sincerity, because you're not being fake then, because you're connected to yourself. Like, you've taken that time to really connect to yourself and learn about yourself, and know your strengths and your weaknesses, really have that deep kind of understanding of who you actually are, without the attachments of the world, the distractions and other things that are going on around you. So when you can make your conscious decisions to how you behave with others. Basically, you're not doing it because of them, you're doing it because of you, because you want to do these things, or you don't want to do these things. You're not doing it because, oh, you're just trying to please somebody, and and you're hurting yourself at the same time, or something. That there's an element you have to become like, it's like sincerity has to be there. So you establish
Absolutely.
some kind of sincerity, because you know that you're doing these things after you connect yourself. You're doing these things because you want Allah to be pleased with you, basically. Because a lot of people do things, and you get burned later on if you do something just to please somebody, and Allah is not the reason why you did those things to please the person. Then you feel burned later on, like if the person, like, if it hasn't gone in the way that you anticipated, if there's some negativity, or you know what I mean, some kind of kickback or whatever, you feel like, oh well, why did I bother doing that then?
Well,
But
I
if
think
you
it
know that you
also,
did it for the sake of Allah, then even you might still feel hurt, maybe, if the person has wronged you, but that's on them. But you will feel contentment in yourself, because you know that what you did was for the sake of Allah, and you just get on, and you just you can move on past that, because you put it behind you, because you're not trying to count your you're not trying to count your good deeds towards other people. Basically, you're just leaving it with Allah, that you did whatever you felt in your heart that was the right thing to do.
that is absolutely true. I will say, but I will add one caveat.
Mm-hmm.
When you are coming from trauma and you relate it to another person, whether it's your parents, whether it's your husband, whether even
Mm-hmm.
your own children, from the conditioning of good girl culture and trauma, but you didn't know it, but you were doing it
Mm-hmm.
because Allah asked you to do it, there's a space of sincerity in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, there is, because it didn't, there's a mixture of cultures. What ends up happening is that you can still have, before you get to the stage you're talking about, for someone who didn't have the proper training of Islam, which is, I would say, over 99% of the Muslims today, because of just the state
Yes.
we're living in, is that there is a space of resentment and hurt and pain and regret because you were taught about Allah wrong. It's not that I regret
Yes.
that I was good to this person. It's that I was
Mm.
told that Allah wanted me to self-abandon. Allah wanted me to give up my needs.
Yes.
Allah wanted me. So there's this grieving period that some moments feel like resentment, but once you do a lot of the healing, you get to the point where you can look back, which is, alhamdulillah, I'm at that point now, and not feel that anymore. I can feel grateful because I
Mm.
know in front of Allah, like I would get up at night and pray to Allah, crying to make me a good wife. And I would
Mm.
write down lists on ways to serve my husband. I wasn't perfect, but I
Mm-hmm.
know in front of Allah that I tried my level best to serve my
Mm-hmm.
husband for his sake. I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't know
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to go that far. And so in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, when I learned that I had been taught about Allah wrong, and I had learned that I had been taught about Islam wrong, oh, I wish I could say that I thought, oh yeah, I did it for the sake of Allah, so it's no problem. No, I was like, I was like, I was so mad. But alhamdulillah, Allah is so merciful, because he put
Alhamdulillah.
me through that. And then he would even, like, even some days I would get so depressed, Allah would give me a good dream. Like, it was like he
Mm.
showed me throughout it all. Like, even now, my God, I'm getting choked up. It's like that in the Quran, like when he was talking about the people who changed they weren't alive for the change of the Qibla to uh the Mecca, the Haram, and
Yes.
their laws letting them know, I would never allow your good deeds to have no effect, your iman to have no effect. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, over and over again, he showed me in my most vulnerable moments of just like what was I doing all that for? And he showed me over and over that I have not abandoned you, and I have not forgotten what you
Mm-hmm.
were. And so like today, like I feel like even when I forget myself, Allah always reminds me, like, don't, like, I wrote down those good deeds. I had the angels write down these good deeds for you, and you're going to be rewarded. You didn't lose anything. Because like, even though like for me personally, I took, and I still take very seriously serving my husband and pleasing my husband. Like even when I was going through a divorce, like I was so scared to wrong him, even in that space, that every day, both of my marriages, I would, if he came in the house, I hugged him when he came home. I hugged him when he left. Even if I was talking about, I want my khula, I still greeted him with the hug. I would still make food for him. And I would apologize if I did anything wrong. And before I left the marriage, I thanked him. Some people said I went overboard, but I don't care. I didn't want to wrong this man because I was like, I'm still his wife, you know? And those aren't the parts that I regret. The part that I regretted was when I was behaving in a way of self-abandonment. And I don't regret it anymore, but in the beginning I regretted it. And someone told me it was Allah who told me to do that. So the grieving part of being a single mother, like that's the space I was at when you were talking about like how was it in the beginning. I was just sitting there like, what in the world was all of that for?
SubhanAllah.
Yeah. But today I look back and I don't have a single regret because I know that I tried my level best to be the righteous wife as I understood Allah obligated me to be. And yes, I had moments where I got emotional, I got upset with my husband. So don't misunderstand the listeners. I don't want you all to think like you're hearing somebody who's like the Sahaba. No, I'm not like that. But I'm saying that I was sincere in my own flaws as who I am as Zakiyyah. And when I mess up, I would correct myself. I get up and pray Qiyamul Layl. And I thought that all of the sacrifice I was doing, Allah wanted and obligated me to do. So I didn't have the initial, when I first became a single mother, I didn't have that reassurance I did it for the sake of Allah. I felt like, honestly, I was tricked. I felt like religion was trick me. Not my husband's tricking me because we were both victims of the same messaging. So I'm not blaming them. I'm saying that I felt like the people who were teaching me about Islam had abused their positions and tricked me and my husband into putting us in a circumstance that would ultimately require us to part because it was just so unhealthy. And obviously we could have healed together if we were both at the same level of awareness. That didn't happen because that's just not how it works for many people. But for those people who are able to do that, alhamdulillah, they need to understand that's a mercy from Allah. Human beings cannot create that. You can say whatever you want. I know people are like, oh, if you really don't want to get divorced, you don't have to get a divorce. I'm like, yeah, you obviously haven't been in that space of having to get a divorce when you don't want to get a divorce. But the beginning of being a single mother was just a lot of confusion and just betrayed by the ummah, by the women, the aunties, the grandmothers of the world. I'm not even talking about my physical aunties. I mean, like, why did you guys sell us this lie about if you abandon yourself? And you even have books that how to get a man to do what you want and be in your feminine energy.
All this kind of stuff.
All of this stuff to just like, it's like you're doing all these things like on a hamster wheel. And there's nothing wrong with healthy feminine energy. There's nothing wrong with doing things to please your husband. But what I'm saying is that what I was healing from was I wasn't told the whole story. If you take out one part of the story, it's not the whole story, So I can now look back and say, today, I don't have any regrets and anger about what I did. But for years, my dear sister, Habibati, I was enraged.
SubhanAllah. I must have really taken some getting over, SubhanAllah. Really, gosh.
It has been a very difficult journey. In between it, I almost lost my deen and I almost lost my life. So it's been a very rough journey. But today, alhamdulillah, I have never felt more joy, gratitude, and love of life in myself than I feel today.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So,
Alhamdulillah.
what would you say are some of the misconceptions that exist in the Muslim communities about single mothers? You kind of slightly touched on some points earlier, in which I think some of the misconceptions, when you refer to you mentioned about some sisters, for example, who like that, you feeling that sense of rejection from some sisters sometimes because they see you as a threat, like that maybe you want to take their husband or something like that. And I've experienced that as well myself.
Yeah,
So fun. I remember there was sometimes some sisters like went out of their way to tell me that, oh, their husband isn't interested in taking a second wife. And I was just like, oh, okay. I'm not just like, okay. Like, just these random conversations that you're just thinking, okay, well, I'm not with you guys there, so this it's okay. I'm not trying to do anything. But people like have this way of like, dropping these things, and then you realize what they're sitting there kind of thinking, subhanallah.
well,
So yeah,
I've seen that today. Like in the beginning, it's similar to what, I'm being 100% honest. In the beginning, it was very triggering, it was very hurtful, and I felt this almost like an obsessive need to make sure I didn't I didn't present myself as threatening. But today, I
yes.
don't like whenever a woman comes at me, indirectly or directly. I just make dua for her, because I can't imagine the emotional turmoil that a woman has to be in, that she has to uh, open up to a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's under the mask of defensiveness or the mask of projecting
Mm-hmm.
that whatever, she is so insecure in her marriage that the only way she can see herself is securing for herself the marriage that she wants is everything except the conversation with her husband. So I
Subhanallah.
like
Definitely.
like that is so sad. Like
Mm.
like that you're so insecure in whatever relationship you have with your husband, that all of the threats you have to ward off are external. Like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that your husband, just even if you're in an emotionally safe marriage, he's not going to marry somebody else. But when you go through healing, and I've experienced monogamy, I've experienced polygyny, I've experienced being the first wife, I experienced being the second wife, and both. And
Mm-hmm.
my first marriage, I was in monogamy, and then I was in polygyny for a certain period of time of the marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
I was the first wife, and then I was the only wife, and then the
Mm-hmm.
first wife, and then the other marriage, I was the
Yes.
second. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things I learned from both sides of that is that I would tell you one benefit of polygyny, if that I will always be grateful for, is the increase of tawakkul. Because
Mm.
I know in front of Allah, if Allah has written down that a man is going to marry another woman, you can, like, you're fighting phantoms. Like, it's not gonna, like, it's not gonna come, like, the woman you're talking to is likely not gonna be the wife. Like, it's
Yes,
and
subhanallah.
like, and how Allah brings, and I'm not talking about a man doing wrong, I'm just talking about qadr. Like, if Allah is
Yeah.
going to bring, I'm talking about even a man who was convinced, I'm going to be in monogamy, I don't, and if Allah tests that man in your marriage with his heart opening up to wanting to be with another woman, sweetheart,
Hmm.
increase your qiyam al-layl, increase your relationship with the Quran. You are not going to be able to stop that. I'm not saying you can't cry to him. Like I told, like, someone, when I was in polygyny, even as a first wife, a sister was asking me
Mm-hmm.
advice, like, how do you remain strong in front of your husband? I said, girl, please, I ain't remaining strong in front of him. I'm crying all of it out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it hurt my feelings. I was like, girl, I got no energy for that kind of stuff. So yeah, but at the end of the day, I knew that he's going to make his decision. So I don't want to you all to
Yeah.
understand. It's not like, I don't believe in that kind of fake polygamy talk where,
Mm-hmm.
yes, confident in yourself and nothing shakes you. Girl, please. I'm crying. I was like, he's seeing all the tears. His shirt gonna be wet at the end of that. So yeah, but spiritually, it taught me how, if Allah decides for two people to be together, whether it's in monogamy or polygyny, it is happening, and it will come from angles and sources and that you could never imagine. And nobody has to be doing funny business. So if
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be your story, that's going to be your story. So tawakkal, even so, that has translated into my life as a single mother, and learning that if just like if Allah is going to bring two people together, they're going to be together. If he decides that you are going to walk the path of a single mother, you can try to save your marriage and everything all you want. You're going to walk that path. So one of the challenges, to go back to your question, in navigating this was getting to that point of tawakkul. That I'm not as bothered anymore by the projection, because now, especially as a mental health professional who has also gone through her own deep, dark, painful healing journey, to be very clear, it wasn't smooth and nice. I'm not even upset with her. My heart goes out to that woman, who feels threatened by someone like me. And I think that one of the challenges, again, as I mentioned before, is also being able to speak freely about the joy, because it's more socially acceptable for me to speak about the pains of being a single mother, but Muslims still aren't yet willing to accept the joy part about what happens, especially for like me, who went through people pleasing, self-abandonment, codependency, all of this stuff, almost not wanting to be alive and almost losing my faith, and then coming to this space that, if I'm being 100% honest, since this is what the topic is about, some days when I have a bad day, the one thing that keeps me going and gives me joy is that I don't have a husband. And it's not because men are bad. It's because I don't have that added responsibility in this difficult moment. And so don't want people to misunderstand. It's not like, whoa, I ain't got no man. No. It's more so like, thank you, Allah, for allowing me to navigate this moment without having to worry about abandoning somebody's responsibilities. I'm sorry, abandoning somebody and abandoning my responsibilities. So it gives so much joy that as I'm navigating this part of my life, I am free from ever having to worry about not fulfilling my responsibilities as a wife. At the same time, another challenge of being a single mother is you still have desires. You still have the desire for the masculine, safe masculine energy. We're Muslims, so we don't play games around, having male friends and all that kind of foolishness. So it really is just all or nothing for the Muslim woman who's a practicing Muslim.
SubhanAllah.
And that is a huge challenge, I will be honest. But for me, it doesn't equal loneliness. Like it's not loneliness for me. It's more so just I have moments of desire for safe masculine energy.
Yes, of course.
In an intimate space, even if it's just hugs. I told my therapist, that's the hardest part, is the hug. It's like not having the strong arms of a man to hug me when I'm having a bad day. At the same time, I have to be 100% honest, because Allah does not put a believer in a situation and then leave them in just stress. He brings the ease with the difficulty, and he brings the ease after the difficulty. So that is one of the most enjoyable parts of being a single mother, is that I am single and I could just focus on taking care of myself and being a mother. And my daughter is 27 or 26. Oh, goodness gracious. I must be getting up there in age, forgetting her age, but 26, 27 years old. And now we have a relationship where we both respect each other's boundaries. We do live together, and neither of us put anything on the other. And having a husband, even when my husband would say, oh, don't worry about anything, relax, I still was not able to fully relax, just psychologically, because I knew that I had to I felt like I'm trying to figure out, like, when is it okay to like go back to norm? Like, I know I'm feeling a bit better now, but like, am I wrong to rest a little bit more? Like, it's crazy making as a wife, like, because I don't want to wrong him, and I don't want to like take advantage of his kindness, but I feel like I need more rest. I'm not sick anymore, but I could really, so I don't miss that.
SubhanAllah. Alhamdulillah. As a therapist, and obviously as a single mother, what would you advise other single Muslim mothers who are struggling?
Connect to yourself, and embrace your spiritual femininity. If you don't know what that means, I know it's hard to, it's challenging to summarize it in the end of a podcast, but I would say I have a book called Embrace Your Spiritual Feminine, and it's about reconnecting to yourself and find your joy. reconnect to yourself, reconnect to your soul, and find joy in your existence as a human soul in this earth, who Allah chose as one of his believers for Jannah. So find your space, heal, and find joy in just your relationship with yourself, and specifically your soul. And that's the advice I would say. That might require, for most of us, I mean, myself included, it requires therapy, support, but prioritize that, and make sure that you're emotionally and spiritually healthy and available to yourself, so that you can be emotionally and spiritually available. Well, I would say so that you can be emotionally and spiritually available to yourself, but which also helps you in being a mother. Because I don't want to say the reason is just for yourself, to be honest. It's for your own soul. But that's the only way that you could have a healthy relationship with anyone else, including your own children.
Absolutely. Mashallah, you summarized it very well. Even at the end of a podcast, alhamdulillah. Yeah, and I've read the book, alhamdulillah. So can you let us know, where is the book available? How can people get hold of the book? Because I mean, I said I've read it, alhamdulillah. I found it was very beneficial, and it had me even asking myself questions. You've got some, it's a workbook, so you've got like prompt questions to get people thinking about their selves, to kind of have that little bit of self-reflection as well. So where's the book available?
I would say that you can either get the paperback, or I think the ebook is also there on Amazon, or if you want to have the course to go along with it, you can go to sqsoul.com, and there's an Embracing Your Spiritual Feminine course that comes along with the book that you can follow along in the exercises. The playback is there. I did it live, but the playback and all of the exercises are still available through the playback of registering for the recording of the course. So either on Amazon or sqsoul.com.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Okay, so couple more questions. What would you say what was one of the hardest things that you've had to deal with as a single Muslim mother?
I would say the hardest thing is just not having the emotional, spiritual, and practical support for whatever I was going through. That's been the hardest, and trying to and to be fair, trying to navigate all of these different challenges while trying to be a provider at the same time, I'm healing, so there's no real rest, that has been really challenging, that I have to concern myself with earning money. And because of the situation with being a single mother, it's like you can try to go to community for help, but it's kind of it's almost like you're going to be treated kind of like those beggars on the street. It's like, it's like, do you really want to put yourself through that? So
exactly, that's the thing, because you have your dignity as well at the same time, isn't it? I think that's something that people don't seem to realize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to and for me, because I know what, for me, it was some people think that when you're not willing to put yourself in certain situations, it's pride. But see, what a lot of people don't realize is that sacrificing your dignity when you've already come from trauma has a price on your nervous system. It has a price on your spiritual health. It has a price on your mental health. It's not just for me, as those people who know me know, I don't have a problem saying I'm a human being going through a challenge. But when it requires me to be in a certain space, for example, when I even confided in a person about some of my challenges, they were like, "What problem do you have?" She literally was like, you're a strong person. And I'm just being blunt. What she told me, you're physically attractive. So if you really wanted to get married, you could have any man you want. You have 2 college degrees. So can you please just stop acting like this is so hard? So and this was another single mother talking to me. So even from other single mothers, it's like, if you're perceived as having it better, and I'm not denying any blessings that Allah has given me or anyone, but it's kind of like like, in order for me, I understood from that conversation, and this was somebody I had known for years who I considered a friend. I understood from that conversation the only way that I would get any support was I had to kind of figure out a way to look broken while I was struggling. And as long as I didn't look broken, nobody was willing, not, I don't want to say nobody, but very few people were willing to be compassionate support or practical support for me, because it was like they didn't believe that I was really struggling. And then, of course,
Yeah,
I
because
remember
you're just doing everything, so you're okay. Yeah.
yeah, and even I had gone to, like, I just wanted to, like, connect with other sisters, and I remember asking a sister, like, where can I go to, like, someone, because I knew they were doing, like, some workout classes, and I had, and to be honest, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but I was going through all of this after having lived in Saudi Arabia for many years, hadn't come back to America for many years. So I was starting over, coming back to the United States after I had to get my driver's license. I was homeless, so all of this was going on, and people were just like, yeah, you're fine. So that was a huge challenge, and understanding that help is only offered as a general rule for people that people can feel superior to and look down on. Like, people generally don't want to support people who they can look at and say they have more than me for anything, even if it's just a perception. And I've had that repeatedly, and that was in the beginning. It was hard. Today I understand it is what it is, so I just don't even ask for certain things in certain environments, because I found my tribe, alhamdulillah. I found some sisters who are just real, and I'm good, and I have my best friend. But at that time, I was just coming back to the United States, and I was not in touch with anyone. I had lost my best friend's number. Somebody had tried to give it to me, but they had given me, like, the wrong number by accident. And so, yeah, it was like the practical challenges. And even when I'm like, okay, I do need help, I do need, it was being told, like, like, you don't have any problems. And I've been told this repeatedly. And every time I was told that, oh no, I won't say every time. Most of the time I was told that was through people who knew me. And that was really, really challenging. But, qadar Allah ma sha fa'al. I'm not at that stage anymore, but that was really hard. That was really hard.
SubhanAllah. I think, like, for me as well, like, I definitely relate to that. But I think as well, when I was going through those things, it's like, I don't know, like, I think I have like a delayed kind of reaction, or I don't know, response to certain stuff. So I went through those same things that you was just saying, but it's like I didn't realize that I've gone through that situation until, like, even years later. Do you know what I mean? Like, later on, when it's kind of, maybe you come out of that situation completely, you're in a different kind of scenario in your life, or a different place in your life. And it's like, sometimes now when I think about these things, I think, oh, actually, that was actually really hard, and I was having a really hard time. But at the time, because there was, I think, you get into a stage where, for some people anyways, everyone's different, but I think for me, I was in a position where I was just getting on with things. So, if you're kind of raised to not complain about stuff, then,
Yeah, that's how I was
whatever is happening to
spiritually.
you, yeah, you just get on with it. And, if there's nobody really to complain to, because if it's like, when you, like you said, you mentioned certain things to people, and they came back with, like, oh well, but, you have this and this and this and this, and listing, your kind of credentials that you have, and that your blessings, it makes you feel like you don't have a right to even express, that you're going through difficulty or something like that,
Yes, and for me, like,
because
my
you look
part.
more capable than others.
Yeah, and so they were like, you look like you're doing better than us who are married, so what do you have to worry about? So, but my thing that I would say today, what remains the biggest challenge is the spiritual and emotional triggers of the parts that I didn't know I had buried, when I was just kind of like, for me, like, certain practical things I did kind of, turn to people. But when it came to spirituality and the trying to figure out my place as a Muslim woman, I stuffed that down and just focused on, let me just say my prayers, let me just hold on to my iman. When I was questioning my worth as a woman, like I didn't consciously do it. I just stuffed it down. So now that my nervous system is in a safer place, it's kind of like, oh, it's safe to come out now. So let me like let you know what I've been going through all these years. So now the triggers are really, really challenging, because on a normal day it's fine. Like today I'm fine, but last week I had a couple of triggers, and I was like, it was like I was back in that space emotionally. And that is a huge challenge, triggers. And I think that that's something all people can relate to, men, women, married, single. But yeah, but specifically as a single mother, what I had to stuff down just to keep going, just as a Muslim, was so much. Because while I'm trying to survive and figure out a way to feed myself and my daughter, I was there were all these existential questions in my soul that I couldn't give voice to. There was also the spiritual confusion about the place of the woman in Islam, and all of that I stuffed down just to survive. And today, step by step, triggers are like bringing to light things I didn't even consciously know were there. And that till today remains the biggest challenge, is to navigate those moments of triggers.
Yeah, definitely.
It's still, those remain the challenge today.
Yeah, subhanallah. It's funny you're saying that, because it's like I feel like, so I still have these experiences every now and then. Like there's certain triggers you don't know that it's a trigger till it happens, basically. So yeah, subhanallah.
Yeah, and that's where I begin. I'm now, the good part of that is I'm now understanding, especially with, there's so much literature out there about these things. So we are blessed in this generation in that sense.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
And I would say at the same time, like I'm beginning to understand just how significant it is to actually die with your iman. Like this isn't some small thing, in this day and time, and this close to the day of judgment, and to be literally fought socially, emotionally, and spiritually by your own brothers and sisters in faith for a qadr that Allah wrote for you that you didn't even want. And so to navigate triggers in that space, like when I'm not in a trigger, I'm fine. But when I'm in a trigger and faced with that at the same time, it's one of the most, it's like I feel like I'm falling into this dark hole, like that I can't get out of. And that is so challenging, because even some of the most well-meaning sisters, like when I reach out to them, they just don't get it. So they're just in the space of, sister, it makes no sense to feel this way, because, and they go on to logic. But anyone it's kind of like a man. I mean, I wish women could understand. It's kind of like if you're crying to your husband because he wants another wife, and even if you're the second wife and he wants a third wife, it doesn't matter. It's like if you're the first wife, he wants a second. If you're crying and he goes, logically speaking, if you really think about it, Allah wouldn't allow it unless it's good for you. You're like crying, like, what? It doesn't, like that logic stuff doesn't make sense. So unfortunately, that's how, sometimes even well-meaning friends, because they don't know, they're not mental health professionals. They don't know, like, how do you meet this person in this space? And so they'll remind me of shaitan, and oh, shaitan is tricking you. I'm like, oh my God, I just really needed comfort, and this is not working, So though that's hard, because I know that I don't have a whole bunch of options, when I'm in this, like, I just need someone to kind of like, I need an emotional hug. I need a spiritual hug. And I mean it just figuratively, you know? And many people do not have the knowledge or even the emotional space inside of them. Many sisters, and these are single mothers themselves, by the way, they don't have that presence enough to help you, because, and I realize sometimes that it's because they're coping in their own way. And a lot of women cope through logic to prevent themselves from breaking down emotionally. So they just project it onto you when you're in that same space that they're still navigating.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's part of the masculine energy that a lot of single mothers have to take on in order to just, make sure that they get by every day and do the things that they need to do.
Yes, because
Yeah,
you don't have
subhanallah.
space for that. And if they give me space, then they have to give themselves space, and then they're going to collapse in the middle of their day, and so they can't open themselves up to that. And it's not even conscious;
Yeah,
it's just an
subhanallah.
immediate protection,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it
Definitely.
always sounds right, just like when men do it to women. It always sounds really logical. I mean, just think about it. You know, this must be what Allah wanted for you. So, you know, if He put it in the Quran, you know, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like you're that's really challenging because it deepens my trigger at the moment, because I feel like it's like someone using Islam to, it's not on purpose because they mean well, but your
Yes.
nervous system experiences things as it experiences. It doesn't experience how you
Mm.
they say we should. So it just sounds like, it feels like gaslighting. Like you're not really feeling what you're
Yeah.
feeling because the Quran says X, Y, and Z. Oh, you're not struggling
Subhanallah.
because the Quran says, oh, clearly you're not going through what you're going through. And if you are, then you need to just do isti'adah. Obviously, shaitan is messing with you.
Mm.
So,
Subhanallah.
if only Islam and life
This
was
is an
that simple.
oversimplification, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's an oversimplification. I mean, even if we look at the ayat in the Quran, Allah doesn't even simplify it like that. Like He literally will tell
Exactly.
you a person is doing this, but they don't perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing good, but they think they're earning all these good deeds, but they're actually, they don't realize it. And then, you know, Allah knows what the nafs is saying to the nafs. I mean, He gives us the complex reality, but then we meet each other with this oversimplification. Yeah, so
SubhanAllah.
yeah, and it's not on purpose, and I don't blame the sisters who do it, because I know, is once I'm out of the trigger, I know why they did it. Because
Yeah.
a person can only meet you as far as they've met themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
they're only in it, even in a certain moment in time, even if they've met themselves in that moment in the past. If they're not in that moment right now, they're not willing to open up that space for you, because they have to open it up
Mm-hmm.
for themselves. At least that's how they perceive it. And so
Yeah,
if they're not meeting themselves in that space right now, they're not going to meet you in that space right now.
definitely. SubhanAllah. So, what would you say it has been one of the most validating moments for you since being a single Muslim mother?
I would say getting up for Qiyamul Layl and having, like, reading in front of my eyes ayats that answer the questions in my heart that I haven't even spoken aloud. Um, Even though I read them before, I just never read them in that way. And also
Mm.
being blessed with a beautiful soul tribe of sisters, especially in my Tadabbur class, where I just call them the Yuzi Soul Tribe, and being blessed to be surrounded by them. I think, like, that spiritual companionship that I feel from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when I get up for Qiyam, and that sisterhood companionship that I experience with my soul tribe of sisters through Quran, that has been so inspirational.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Barakallah feekum, sister. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thanks for giving so much of your time. And because I know you're a busy lady as well, alhamdulillah. I would love to be able to take part in some of your classes in the future, inshallah, because I know definitely they'll be beneficial. So, inshallah, we'll put the links to everything in the description box so that anybody who's listening or wants to benefit from, any of your books or classes or what have you, they inshallah can get easy access to those things, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. Barakallah feek. Jazakallah khair for having me.
Right, yeah, sister, and have a blessed evening, inshallah.
You
Assalamu
too.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.